Oh, there we go. There's a brief moment where Discord broke for me.
Hey,
Welcome everyone. I am Brendan Hansen, also known as Edgy Erebus, and I'm joined by Mark and Jacob again. For just a brief moment, go ahead and explain where people can find you and what you do. We'll start with you, Dad.
okay, hey. I'm Mark, known as MRKH Music on the screen here. I am the co-creator of The Hero's Tale, fantasy role-playing game, author of Roll Dice Build Character, how to build up your family with role-playing games, and the fantasy novels of the same name. And I can be found at MRKH Music on Twitter. That's probably the easiest place to get to me.
Alrighty.
Oh, also on Facebook as Mark Hansen Author.
Alrighty. And what about you, Jacob?
I am a co-creator of The Hero's Tale. People can find me at PKJ Gaming on Twitter. That's
Alrighty.
about it.
Alrighty. Well, let's get into today's episode. If anyone is in the chat, can you tell me if the music volume is too loud? Because it's a bit loud on my end, but everything's loud on my end. So I'm not sure.
I'm actually not hearing music.
You do not hear music. Do you have it muted? Like, are you able to hear us?
I'm hearing you guys just fine. Oh, wait a minute. That may not be. Hang on, let me.
There was just a break in the music because of in between songs.
Okay, well, we'll check it in a minute.
Yeah.
Carry on.
Let's get into today's topic.
Now, I'm sure I don't know if I should mention this, but remember remember the thing we talked about?
What thing we talked about?
About this stream. I can only be here for...
Oh, right, yes. Yeah, so we'll be ending at about 10:45 Mountain Time today. Yes. Let's get into today's topic, which is DMPCs. There's a few points that I want to go over for DMPCs today. One of the big ones is how you can do DMPCs without railroading your players. And so that's a big trick that I've struggled with in the past when it comes to DMPCs.
Let's talk a little moment. This is kind of a deeper topic. So let's take just a moment and each of us talk about what a DMPC is.
Okay.
Why it's tricky. What are the different ways it's used, and then we'll get into how to do it right.
Alrighty. So, a DMPC is where the DM is running a player character either in the party or against the party. Typically it's referred to in the party, but I wanted to be able to use this to also talk about creating whole character sheets and things like that for enemy NPCs. Along those lines.
It's a very different thing than just running into a shopkeeper and trying to negotiate the price of a magic ring, or encountering a captain of the guard and trying to sneak past him. Those kinds of things and those kinds of NPCs, you don't really need a lot of data or stat blocks on the NPCs, but there comes a time when a character of personality becomes so recurring, so much an integral part of the story, that they become a full character, and you actually make up a stat sheet or a character sheet for them. Is that kind of what you're talking about? Plus, then you have times when, and we used to do this when I was a lot younger, when the DM would say, well, I want to play a character in this adventure, which is kind of weird. Kind of awkward.
That gets a bit tricky, yeah. One big thing on that topic, actually, though, is when it's acceptable for a DM to play a character. Like, if you're playing in a one-on-one game, it typically helps to have a sidekick character. I play in one-on-one games fairly often, and whenever I do, I like to have a secondary character, and if the player is up to playing two characters, then all the better for them. But most of the time, I'm playing with either newer players or players that don't quite understand everything about D&D in the same way that I do. And so it helps to have a secondary character that can somewhat guide them through the journey of the adventure.
And plus, I feel like it gives the players someone to play off of in terms of the story.
Yeah, it can be one of the best ways and also one of the worst ways to provide information to a player. Because on the one hand, you need to make sure that your PC, your DM PC, would know that information. Right. If it's something that they would know, then it's a very good way to be able to provide, hints and guidance to the players. But if it's a random fact that they probably wouldn't know, or that you are unsure if it's not something that they for sure would know, it's typically best to find other ways for the players to find that information. Excuse me. Otherwise, it gets to the problem of all right, well, if we're ever having trouble, at least the DMPC will let us know what we need to do.
Yeah.
And
or it'll bail us out, or it'll give us plot armor.
Right. One of my favorite DMPCs that I played was a small pseudo dragonborn named Dex.
Oh yeah, you told me about him.
He had I always like to give my main characters unique voices that are easily recognizable. So he kind of talked like this, and he owned a bookstore. And his whole story was kind of unique, but that's not necessarily the point. The point is that he owned a bookstore. He was thousands of years old, if not hundreds, or if at least hundreds, I should say. And so he knew a lot of random facts, which was good because my players were constantly wanting to go. It was a planescape adventure. Planescape, which means that they were going from plane to plane. So whenever they needed to talk or to figure out where they're going next, they could always turn to Dex and go, "Hey Dex, what's hell like this time of year?" And it's a bit of an inside joke because Dex would always say, "Oh, I hear that place is lovely this time of year." Like, it was just wherever they said it was lovely this time of year. And then he would give them a couple facts about it. And because he owned a bookshop and knew a lot of things, but he was not very useful in combat. So despite traveling around with the players, he was able to help with little tidbits of knowledge and lore, but he never really was able to help in combat much.
Are you going to reveal his secret?
Nah.
Hey, there's no players of that game listening right now.
Nah. Yikes. All right. Moving on.
Yeah, well, let me talk a little bit about Ballroom Battlefield. Because that was probably one of two examples that I've game mastered where I've felt like GM PCs served us really well in that adventure. So that was set in the city of Twin Rivers, and Jacob there was playing Xander of House Northolt, and he was a high prince of that house.
If anyone knows Stormlight Archives, it's basically Adolin.
Yeah, and it was kind of a blend, politically speaking, in between Stormlight and the Mistborn. The first half of the Mistborn books, with all of the houses vying for.
It was the Fallen Empire.
Yeah, trying to manipulate each other.
Empire. Sorry.
And it started out with us not really wanting to, with me as the narrator not wanting to add these particular characters in, but they started flowing in very naturally. Brendan was playing a Felician, which is kind of like the Leonin of our world.
Kaji, Tabaxi.
Yeah, cat people. And he was pretending to be a ambassador from one of the prides of. That was kind of an interesting story too. But he was very much into the spying, intrigue, trying to black market sell things. And Jacob was sort of the opposite, trying to be the good paragon who will find nobility triumph. Very much trying to do the Adolin Dalinar kind of thing, while everybody else around them is corrupt. And along the way, some characters got introduced. One of Jacob's best friends, Tyler, who joined us in the game, he had I'm trying to think if it was sister or cousin. His character had a sister or a cousin who joined the party as a GMPC and provided a lot of romantic tension for Xander of Northolt. Then there was
Granted, the one that I was actually betrothed to was kind of a jerk.
Yeah, she was an enemy, and she ended up almost being an NPC or a game master run PC as well. There were a lot of actual recurring NPC characters in this adventure, which was kind of intriguing. Yeah, she was on the list of the bad guys there, and at one point tried to trap you in a multi-dimensional space that you guys had to figure out how to get out of. And my point about all of these things, then we had Brother Maynard, who was Brendan's assistant, a monk from the not character class monk, more of an actual brother of the Church of Three Lights. And then there was
Lady Diane.
Yeah, she was a pretending to be a society lady to spy for one house against the other, and she ended up siding with the Pride of the Golden Sun and Brendan's. My point is there was a lot of these side characters, and it was kind of tricky balancing them all. And yet, it worked out pretty well. And what I did as the game master is I created character sheets for them and handed them to Brendan and Tyler to play as secondary characters, but there were moments when I, as the game master, would step in and say, oh, she's doing this. And then as a player, Tyler would have to run with that. Or, but particularly in combat, where things are much more immediate, I pretty much let Brendan run Brother Maynard and Lady Diana, and pretty much let Tyler run El Rhea. When we were dealing with the bad guys and Lady Caroline, obviously those were opponents, so I had to run them in combat. And her brothers, when they were accusing you of kidnapping her.
There's one thing I do want to mention really quick, and that is how you're running the DMPCs. Is you're running them in the sense of, like you had said, very much the players are I'm trying to figure out how to describe this. My mind just went completely blank.
It was kind of a hybrid between who was in charge of the character. I allowed you, Brendan, and Tyler to make decisions for these characters for the most part, but there were times when, as the game master, I stepped in and said, I want that particular thing to go this way. I want them to find you a particular piece of information. For example, Lady El Rhea flirting with Xander. And that whole relationship was easy to play up, partly because Tyler bought into it so well and played the character so nicely that way.
Quite frankly, I did as well.
Yeah, and so it was really easy and fun to play that in. It was a really fun tangle of intrigue and connections. It was really, when we called it the ballroom battlefield, it actually was more like that. It was not a lot of
actual combat
fighting, but a lot of tension. And there were some good combat fights. You know, there was the when they interrupted the beheading of the peasants, and boy, we're probably going to end up on some FBI watch list for this one.
So one thing I want to mention really quick before I want to kind of shift gears in what we're talking about is making sure that if your players are the ones running the DMPCs, make sure the players understand who that PC is, and they don't need to know their goals or things like that, but knowing their general personality. Whenever I was playing Brother Maynard, I myself was playing this roguish, assassin-like black market dealer, but I had to play Brother Maynard as a very much holy man. And so I had to make sure that when I was making decisions for Brother Maynard, I was making his decisions and not just what my character would have wanted.
It was kind of interesting too, because a large part of the adventure involved disclosing the corruption at the upper levels of the dominant church there. And it was a lot of fun both playing and watching you play the transformation of Brother Maynard. Because he had a lot of character growth in that situation, and that was kind of sobering for him.
Yeah. So now I kind
That's
of
when
want
the
to
role playing gets really good.
now I kind of want to shift gears and talk about DMPCs as stat blocks and
Well, we
character
do.
sheets.
I would like to mention the time that I made one of my players cry with a DMPC.
Oh, yeah?
26891. Thank you so much for the follow.
Ooh. So, we had, so there was this, okay, so one of my players was, had this character that kind of, how do you describe it? Was basically the group mom.
Okay.
And so I made a character to kind of play off of that. Well, it turns out that, her name was Alice. And she was a half Gandhi.
Okay, so like a half shadowy person.
Yeah. But she had her memory wiped. And her name was Alice, and I disguised her as this little orphan girl. And so KandA's character immediately took a shine to it, and it became a member of the party. And and I also made it quickly became a mainstay. And quickly that's how I could not only deliver information, but like when she was in trouble, it kind of motivated Kendra for the scene.
Yeah, really quick similar story is I had hags are one of my favorite types of monsters in role-playing games, and I had a night hag. My party had gone to the Shadowfell, still that like Planescapes adventure.
Is this our game?
No, this is my
not our game, but the Saturday
no.
group.
This was a Planescapes adventure where they were going from plane to plane, and their first plane that they went to was the Shadowfell. They quickly met up with a night hag who was pleading that they find her daughter for her, and her daughter turned out not to be, well, she was a hag, but hags don't become hags until they're 12 years old. And so there was this little 8-year-old girl in a field of screaming flowers, each flower containing the soul of a living person. And if you disturbed it, it would scream and damage you. So they had to find a way to get her out of there. And they eventually did. Her name was Eldred, and she quickly was picked up by the party as the party realized the hag had kidnapped her and killed her parents and things like that. And everyone loved her so much that eventually when we got a new player, the player ended up taking over her. This was like 10 years later, so she was 18, and the player ended up taking over her as an actual player character. And so it was really fun to watch that transition from DMPC to an actual PC, and it's fun using that as motivation. If she was threatened in any way, all of the PCs were on board. Whatever was happening, they were going to defend her. And that was a really cool motivation tool. All right, now let's go on to stat block. Not necessarily what are on stat blocks and things like that, but how to run DMPCs with stat blocks. In some games, character creation is overly complicated. Not naming names, D&D. Sorry, just slipped out. I love D&D, but it is very complicated.
Why do you think they have D&D and Beyond?
Yeah, and it's a great tool, but sometimes looking over an entire character sheet, especially late game where you're having like level 18, 19, 20 characters, it's sometimes better to create just a quick stat block. Basically, creating the character sheet is how I do it, and then I pick their main abilities. I take all their stats, their basic stats, you know, the skill proficiencies and stuff like that, and I write that down. I take their basic stats and primary abilities, and I transfer those over, and then everything else is just kind of meh. You know, there's a lot of filler abilities. So I try to keep them as simple as possible. But you can use, I've done it where I've just used character sheets before. You just have to make sure that you know the character sheet really well so you don't bog combat down.
I've tried it a number of different ways, actually, myself. In Ballroom Battlefield, it came to a point where we simply couldn't carry on with a lot of these characters without actual full character sheets. And they were starting to gain experience points, or in our game, story points. They were engaging in the combats, so we had to have their full stats. So it transitioned very gradually from a point where it's just, oh, they're a clever NPC that has a recurring theme and a recurring role in the story, to, oh, we better write this stuff down. And
it's good to have those stats.
And when I came to the point where I realized that Lady Caroline was going to actually be in a position where she might end up fighting Xander and fighting the party in combat, I said, okay, I guess I better lay down a character sheet. When she was kind of in league with some of the top leaders in the Church of Three Lights. And so I worked up half stat blocks, kind of like what you're talking about, for 3 of the archbishops. Right. And they were very powerful wizards in their own right. I guess they'd kind of more be considered clerics, but
Yeah.
We got lucky.
We did get really lucky that fight.
Yeah. Partly, yeah, mainly because I got some really bad rolls, but it all worked out.
Yeah, it was a fun fight nonetheless.
So a lot of that depends on what you need in game. In this book about gaming with the family, this was actually a situation way back, even before I had a family. I created a character that was kind of a tag along to the party, kind of like what was it, Dax? I don't remember whichever one it was. Dax. Yeah, see, I get it eventually. And since he was kind of this annoying little elven boy that tagged along and got in the way of the party, but he didn't actually get into combat much. So aside from having hit points that he could take damage,
was that your... Sorry.
Go ahead.
Was that your Hell's Bells?
No, that was the Sunspark sword. And, the kid turned out to be an avatar, a manifestation of the god that made the sword that they were questing for. But in the meantime, he was just an annoying little twerp, getting in everybody's way, testing their patience, and ultimately testing the guy's paladinhood. So I did not have a stat block for him. I didn't have a character sheet for him. He just was there. So I've done all kinds of different variations of detail, I guess is the word I'm looking for.
Right.
In an attempt to do this particular issue we're talking about today.
One thing, so I have a set list of topics that I'd like to go over. And with that, on that line, using monsters as DMPCs can be a ton of fun.
Like the time you guys tamed the blue dragon?
Exactly.
Or the time that Helios punched a dragon in the face and tamed it.
Yeah, beat it into submission. And then there was a time in one of my D&D campaigns where they had a cleric that was all about preserving life. And he didn't like to fight. He would fight alongside his friends, but he didn't like to. And so when a manticore started fighting them, through a series of really good rolls and a couple of unique spell ideas, he was actually able to convince the manticore not to fight them, and eventually had him join the party as this kind of ally, sort of. And the manticore had his name changed, and it was changed to Shedemoev, meaning the one who is reborn. And it was this really kind of interesting moment. Now, granted, that was back when I first started playing D&D, and I had no idea what I was doing. So, should I have allowed that is up for debate. But it was a cool moment, and it's something that we've even recently talked about, as despite this campaign being years ago, we mentioned the Manticore and getting him back, or getting him into the party. And it was just kind of an interesting thing.
Funny how all of those memories get really sunk deep into your psyche, don't they?
Yeah. So monsters can make for excellent DMPCs, even if not used in the exact same way. Having some kind of pet or something for the party is almost as useful. Useful is not the right word, but you know what I mean. Enjoyable as having a normal DMPC. Couple of things to keep in mind. We're running out of time, actually.
On our streaming.
Huh?
Yeah. Never mind. Carry on.
So I just there were 3 quick things I wanted to go over. One is, we briefly talked about it, making sure that you're not using your DMPC to railroad things. It's okay to give direction, but not, saying, I need to go do this right now, because otherwise it takes away the player's agency. Now, if the PC might need something and might say that something's, going on, or he has to return to his tribe, and that's okay, and give the players the availability to go and help them, but don't have the DMPC say, I need to return, and then let the players decide if they want to go as well. Also, make sure that you're creating your PCs to help your players. The DMPC is not for you to be having extra fun and enjoying the act of playing a PC, although it is fun. You want to make sure that your DMPC is there to suit the player's needs. If the players don't...
Part of that actually comes in by establishing a clear idea of what the story purpose of an NPC is in the first place. I mentioned before the whole bit about, negotiating for selling a coin or selling a ring in a magic shop. What's the purpose of that? Well, you get the ring, you go on. Sometimes you end up going back to the same magic shop, and he's kind of a fun recurring character, but he's not necessarily going to really impact the depth of the story, right?
Right.
Pumat Soul.
Right. But even Pumat Soul didn't help out much until like late in the story. He was a very fun character and everyone loved him, but he wasn't until later on a DMPC.
Yeah. So have a purpose, I guess, is my advice on that. Lady Caroline, her purpose was to be the antagonist, or one of the antagonists. Brother Maynard, his purpose was as a foil to Brendan's Landon. Elrea started off as kind of romantic comic relief, but she ended up actually being a very functional part of the party. So have a purpose.
None of you are referencing Theod.
What do you mean?
Well, Theod was a player character.
Not our DMPC, and we're talking about DMPCs.
Right.
Yeah. Theod was played by the same guy who was playing Tyler, your friend, was playing Theod and was playing Araya. But Theod was his player character. And actually, he was doing the dynamic between the two of them very well. Because she was a lot more frivolous and impulsive, and Theod was a lot more cautious and methodical. And it almost split his brain up.
It was really fun to watch.
Between the two of them, he did a great job of it.
It was very much the same way with my Felician and Brother Maynard, because it was interesting to see, like, I as a player had to go, okay, I want to do this thing, it's slightly sketchy, but you know, it's fine. And Brother Maynard would not do that for sure. So it was really fun because I started to have to sneak past myself to do things. And it became something really fun. We are running out of time here. Really quick, we have a couple of viewers. If any of you have any questions about either DMPCs, about The Hero's Tale, which is our game, or about any of the books that my dad has mentioned, anything D&D related, Hero's Tale, role-playing games, feel free to ask. We're going to be wrapping up here pretty soon. But
if anybody views this in Utah, I've been setting up a series of public appearances in northern Utah. Some of them here in our hometown farmers market. There's a game convention, an old time game convention, been going on for years, called SaltCon. We're going to have a booth there. And there's just some great stuff going on this summer. So post a comment or hit the like button and we'll mention those as they come up.
Here is a list of the various books that we have. So the first one is The Hero's Tale. That is our role-playing game system. The next two are the books that my dad has written based off of the setting of The Hero's Tale, called A Tale of Heroes. And then the last link is Roll Dice Build Character, a book for role-playing and building up your family with role-playing games. All right, well, we are out of time. Thanks everyone who tuned in. Thank you again, Noah, if you're still here for following. And we will be posting this video on our YouTube channel, The Hero's Tale, THT. And
if you're seeing this on YouTube, like and subscribe.
Yeah. And if you're not seeing this on YouTube, go like and subscribe the video anyway. All right, thank you all so much for watching, and we'll see you all next time.
Bye-bye.
Bye, guys.
Bye.